The Rubicon, starring Jeremy Winston, in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, you're on again with the Rubicon. This is Jeremy Winston on Advent Sports Network. Check out my boy Lance J. Lewis on The Radio Show. We're doing a post-State of the Union 2016 coverage with Dr. Joel Boyce. Of course, I hope all of my listeners have had a chance to listen to Obama's State of the Union last night. If you haven't, I'm sure there are about 100 different platforms where you can find it for free. C-SPAN, CNN, whatever the case may be. I have Dr. Boyce on because I know that he, over the past, 8 years during Obama's presidency, and maybe prior to that, you let me know, has taken the transcript from many of his major speeches and analyzed them from oratorical and a writing perspective. And I wanted to get his response on this speech as it compares to some of the recent Obama speeches. I know that on my Twitter, Facebook, IG feed, Instagram feed is full of people who are just praising and supporting Obama no matter what he says. And be it right or wrong, I'm curious to know when we look at the facts and the skill of writing how this speech panned out. So Dr. Boyce, tell me what are your initial responses to President Obama's speech last night?
Well, I definitely think last night's speech was one of his better speeches. This one was really focused more towards pointing towards the future, and you can see, unlike some of his other speeches where he kind of outlined more of what he wanted to do, he talked a lot about some of the things he's accomplished. Fact-checking, he did a lot of, that was probably one of my favorite parts, where he really spoke about some of the problems with some of the Republican candidates and some of the things that they've said, some of Donald Trump's Islamophobic comments that he's made, and some Ted Cruz comments about carpet bombing some of our enemies, and he really tried to make sure that the American people was clear about some of the things that he has accomplished during his presidency, so that he can set the record straight. And this is his last State of the Union address. I also think he was he made some gestures towards the other side, very conciliatory to Paul Ryan about working on some legislation for poverty. And at the end of his speech, he really pointed towards how he wanted America to be able to be shaped. From a rhetorical standpoint, he used a lot of ethos to really make sure he showed that he was one of the American people. He talked a lot about things that we can do, and as Americans, he really wanted to make sure he brought himself down and said that we can work on these things together. It wasn't as much use of pathos where he really worked on the emotions as he has done in some other speeches, because the time was appropriate, like Sandy Hook or some other tragedies that he has had to be president during. But this was very much a uniting kind of a speech, and something pointing towards the person who will take the office after him, setting up an agenda that they have the potential to be able to pass through a Republican-controlled Congress. So I thought that was definitely some very key things that he put out there that somebody can take and go with, but it wasn't as much red meat for Republicans who would disagree with some of the things that he would have to say about his agenda.
I agree. He definitely seemed to take a different approach in previous years. One of the things that I was somewhat surprised about this evening was that he did not refer specifically to gun violence, especially in light of his recent executive action, and also the empty seat next to First Lady Michelle Obama, which was to signify those who had been lost to gun violence, and that he didn't refer to anything around that specifically. Now, I will say he really spoke with a lot of generalities in this. He also didn't talk about Black Lives Matter. He didn't talk about the Iran. Well, he did mention Iran deal, but he didn't mention the American, soldiers or ships that were caught. There's some things that I think people were expecting him to address specifically, but he tended to stay very general and very forward-thinking, as you said. a lot of, I guess, some of the criticism that is going to be is thrown at him already, and probably we'll hear some more as the day goes on. Was that his ideas were divisive and very much from a left standpoint. It didn't necessarily offer any opportunities for Republicans or those who disagree to have a way into to negotiate. I mean, did you see opportunities where I know you said he was conciliatory in some sense to Paul Ryan at that one point, but I think the tenor of it seemed to be very very directed in a doubling down on his policy. Do you see many opportunities for?
Well, I do think that he also, early in the speech, he mentioned the work that he had been able to do with Congress on the reforms to the No Child Left Behind Act, which was something that was actually pretty surprising to many people in the United States that Congress was able to get something done that fast and to agree on an overhaul of such a massive legislation. So I think that early on in the speech, he wanted to say, well, we were able to do something like this to kind of highlight that we can work together on other large-scale things. You see, he talked a lot about climate change, which even though he kind of took he used a lot of humor in this speech, some not-so-subtle jabs, but he did point out that many of the other large global leaders agree that the climate is changing. Used a lot of logos in his speech where he pointed out his logical argument with facts and statistics to back it up, even saying that the military community will even be able to say that, or if you looked at just the temperature records about how this is something that is it's a real occurrence, to say we should be able to get together to work on these kinds of things. And we talked about the reduction or in terms of the cost of the pump for many Americans, and saying that we could work together on some more clean energy to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, which we know is something that is a hot-button debate between the two groups, but it is something where he thinks he can find some common ground. So even though sometimes he may have taken, more of a leftist approach towards some of these topics, he did leave himself a lot of wiggle room in the generalities that you talked about, where he didn't box the next person into his personal agenda, but he put some things out there that should be, whether it's national security, whether it's our leading from a position of strength and not becoming the policeman of the world or getting ourselves involved in nation building, as he cited what happened in Vietnam or what happened in Iraq. It does leave his predecessor some flexibility to be able to build on those things, but not necessarily have to do it the way he would have done it, knowing that he is going out of office in a year.
And, the one thing that, one thing that he did actually give a specific plan to was this effort. I can't remember what he called it, but this effort that's going to be led by Vice President Joe Biden to find a cure for cancer. That was the one thing that he said that this was something that he's going to do. Everything else, like you said, was very much a vision-setting statement about what he has done, where the nation is.
What was interesting about that part, what he said, is that Joe Biden, of course, losing his son to cancer is very symbolic, being the person who he would say would lead mission control. But he did not mention, which is something you said earlier, that Congress also failed to reauthorize or chose not to reauthorize funding for, I believe, the National Institutes of Health, or it might be CDC, I'm sorry, who wanted to study gun violence and its impact. So while citing the National Institutes of Health and their work on cancer, he didn't mention the fact, even though he had in a speech before this, about how Congress failed to provide funding to study the impacts of gun violence through CDC.
Which I may say
definitely will be brought out.
Yeah, that the Congress lack of funding, supporting funding for CDC and gun violence research is historically, this is a whole other topic, but it's historically something that has been pushed by the NRA, the gun lobby, and that they have strongly fought against this study because the statistics are so overwhelming against gun owners and ownership that it's pretty damning in a lot of ways. But one other thing you were talking about the jokes that he used and so forth, and just in terms of a speaking style, I mean, I'll be honest, I laughed at the first opening moment. It looked like Obama's looking for a fight. I mean, he said, after the speech, I'll be shaking hands. I can help some of you. I can give you some tips on how to win in Iowa. I mean, clearly I think that went over like a lead balloon in the Republican side. I mean, I don't think they cut to Rubio, but they did cut to Rubio sometimes after that, and Rubio's face looked like he just wanted to, just call out and touch Obama, and I just kept on thinking of that statement about. But my thing is, how is that received? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, that can't set the stage for any type of bipartisan air in the room when you're coming out the gate with those type of jabs. I mean, is that something people just kind of brush over, or do you think it lasts and hangs in the room for the remaining of the speech?
Well, I think President Obama is kind of known for he has these little quips that he uses. Like I believe last time he talked about his election, he said, "I've won a few of them." He thinks very quickly on his feet. Actually, when I was doing my rhetorical analysis, that actually was not in his speech.
I think they set it up, man. I think they set that up.
That was actually not. So there were several things that he said that he was speaking off the cuff, which was not on the teleprompter. But just the moment felt right. He did say the first part about Iowa, that was there, but some of the other quips that he used were not there. And what was interesting about him using them, it's intentional because it sets a more humorous tone that he would be trying to establish before he would bring more serious material. And so he was actually able to control the ebb and the flow of the speech by using humor, using sarcasm. Sometimes he will use that to set a particular tone, or sometimes when he wants to be more somber, you will see that he will pause. He may look off sometimes until the end, until the crowd will get silent, and then he'll shift to a more serious initiative that he may be talking about. He actually does that in most of his speeches. He's known for that, but he uses humor to be able to control the ebb and the flow of his speeches and to evoke a certain response out of the audience.
But I do want to just say one thing though, that I don't co-sign with your ideology that Different World was a greater show than the Cosby Show, just in terms from an artistic perspective. I mean, like for me, the Cosby Show is a little more. I mean, let me just say the first couple of years of the Different World were really kind of pitiful. It didn't really start taking off for me. Let me see, what's a good kind of defining moment in the Different World?
The moment
when Whitley and Dwayne Wade.
Dwayne Wade houses Whitley from Byron. That trumps anything in TV history for black people. I don't care what it is. For black people, dude, let me just say, I mean, it was such a very common artistic writing ploy, to have somebody break up a wedding.
Whitley was the finest girl and the richest girl at the school. Dwayne Wade was a nerd, skinny kid from Bed-Stuy. He took the hottest joint, and he took her from a state senator. Dude,
was he really a state senator? He was running for something. I thought he was running for like county commissioner or something like that.
Well, hey,
Byron.
The Rubicon is an ASN Talk Radio expansion franchise about current events, news, and geopolitics. All footage is taped in Dayton, Ohio, and produced at Advent Sports Network's downtown studios in the lovely Emerald City of Seattle, Washington. In 49 BC, Julius Caesar led an army over the Rubicon River from Gaul into northern Italy. By doing so, he crossed the point of no return and declaration of war against the Roman Empire. Centuries later, you are listening to Jeremy Winston reach his point of no return only on Advent Sports, the Rubicon.
No, but he probably had about 4 incidents in the speech that would be something that would be a humorous quip. And like I said, he did mention in there about, I know some of you all want to get to Iowa, but the part about I've won a few elections, or I can teach you how to win in Iowa, that part he actually spoke off the cuff. That was not in his original draft that he released to the media.
Right,
so right. He actually, the moment felt right to just add that last little extra jab there.
And I think that I could just feel the Republicans' heads getting hot collectively at that statement. I follow a few Republican commentators on Twitter, and they, as expected, they took issue with everything that he said, and it's somewhat disappointing that that we've become so divisive, but at the same time, there are different perspectives and viewpoints. One other thing that I didn't notice is Paul Ryan I felt like I think he clapped maybe 3 or 4 times the entire speech. And when I'm remembering John Boehner was much more conciliatory with his applause. Now, I was wondering, maybe Ryan was clapping underneath the table, like you just couldn't see his hands. But I literally just started to observe his shoulders and realized that there's just no movement at all. I mean, in your State of the Union watching, is that common that the Speaker of the House claps so little, even if it's in the opposing party?
Absolutely, and this is part of this is the optics of knowing that you are the face of you're the number 3 man in the country. So
right,
you are
right.
the face of the Republican Party, and you are the one person who will be seeing the entire speech. So
right.
His job is primarily to remain as somber as possible, to clap when there may be something that they can find that can be a major issue that Republicans would agree on. But John Boehner, he was actually criticized quite often throughout his leadership that there were sometimes he supported the president too much, even though he opposed him on many issues. Many of his peers thought that he gave in too much to President Obama, which in his stepping down, even though it was surprising, many of the rank and file of the Republican Party felt as though they wanted somebody who would be more of a staunch right-wing Republican, which is why that process of selecting Paul Ryan was not as easy as they thought it would be, and he actually was not sure he wanted that job. And so you can see that he is trying to be the leader of that party, but even if he agrees with them on certain things, even when Obama extended the olive branch, as the political commentators are calling it, about working for the poor, you saw no movement on his face about that particular item. He knew Obama was going to say they all have an advanced copy of his speech. However, he did not acknowledge that, again, to keep up the appearance of the Republican Party holding true to its value. Remember that they are in the middle of their primary season, so they are trying to make sure that they show that they're going to hold true to their conservative values for their voters.
That's true. That's true. I mean, just remembering back to the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, a lot of even the Republican and the GOP establishment. I mean, they outright cheered when Boehner left. I mean, I remember Sean Hannity, who I consider one of the leaders of the party, even though he's just a talk show host. But I think a lot of his narratives really shapes the opinion. I mean, he mocked, Boehner for crying, because he cried when the Pope came and all that stuff. And they were just literally head over heels. And I remember that a few times they were trying to get rid of Boehner, and it was almost an opportunity to oust him a couple of Januaries ago. So, so that all makes sense. And I'm just thinking back to Paul Ryan. I think the first time he clapped was when Obama said that we had the strongest troops in the history of the world. And I mean, I think, of course, everyone's going to applaud to that.
Well, I think that was the first time. That's a Republican strong point about making sure they build up the military. So.
Oh yeah, he jumped to his feet. He wanted to be.
Anything about he said something else about taxes. Anytime he talks about something that's a major Republican stronghold, it might have evoked a response from him, but he definitely is a better poker player with his face than John Boehner would have been.
Absolutely. Well, listen, you've been listening to the Rubicon with Jeremy Winston. We've been talking to Dr. Joel Boyce in coverage of last evening's State of the Union speech, President Obama's final one for his term. And probably, I mean, barring any significant or major incidents between now and next year, this will probably be his last major speech. Because I don't believe, and I probably should have done some research before I started this call, but the outgoing president doesn't give a speech at for the last part. It's the new elected president who gives the inauguration speech. That's pretty obvious.
Yeah, and like you said, barring a major event, the next time we probably would hear him will probably be as a keynote speaker at the Democratic National Convention.
And also we'll hear him at the Correspondents' Dinner, and that's when he goes into full comedian mode. And people look forward to that, and he tends to be pretty funny, so I imagine that he'll turn on for that. So, I mean, I know you've got a lot of speeches. You said it's kind of middle of the road. I mean, so on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you give this speech for Obama?
I would probably say this may be, in my opinion, maybe his second or third best of his speeches in terms of his State of the Union. Definitely his inaugural speech. His first one was one of his best moments.
Right.
And probably if you're looking for something that would probably be more laden with pathos, something that would be stronger and will pull on the heartstrings, probably the speech at Sandy Hook or after the shooting in Arizona would be two of his probably more specific, strong speeches as it pertains to pathos. If you're looking for something where he's using a lot of logic, I would say anything about speech about Syria or the speech about gun violence was definitely one that had a good mixture about his executive action on gun control a week ago. Was actually another one of his very good policy speeches. So it depends on what you're looking for, but he usually mixes them all together and has a good mixture in terms of different rhetorical devices that he would use to appeal to his audience.
The Rubicon is an ASN Talk Radio expansion franchise about current events, news, and geopolitics. All footage is taped in Dayton, Ohio, and produced at Advent Sports Network's downtown studios in the lovely Emerald City of Seattle, Washington.